Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, and in this programme we'll be discussing the vile and vitriol anti-Semitic postings posted by US music artist Kanye West, or now legally known as Ye, that's been dominating our news headlines across the Atlantic, in America and also around the world for the past couple of weeks. And Kanye West is his net worth is between 6.6 and 2 billion US dollars. He is one of America's big music icons, and sadly what we've seen in the past couple of weeks is that he's been using his social media platforms, particularly Instagram, where he has over 18.5 million followers, to use that platform to spread hatred and discord in America, particularly against America's Jewish community. But we'll also be discussing in this program what dark and dangerous theology lies behind Kanye West's social media posts. Reagan, it's great to be able to do a program with you, and I know that you're recovering from your shoulder operation, so pleased you could be here. But can you explain to our British audience who kind of Kanye West is, and also the social and the cultural impact that he's made in the United States as being one of the most influential African Americans of his generation?
Yeah, very definitely. Many people will be familiar with the name Kanye West. He is, as you already said, legally known now as Ye, but still most people I see refer to him as Kanye or Kanye West. He's been known for many years for his music career, but also very controversial statements he's made often on social media, in public environments, fashion shows, and whatnot. He's born in 1977 in Atlanta, Georgia. He is a producer, a rapper, a fashion designer, and he parlayed his production success in the late 1990s and early 2000s into a career as a popular, critically acclaimed solo artist. So it was really in the early 2000s that I first began to come across him. I never really listened much to his music. In fact, the only album I would have heard in full would have been his Jesus is King album, which was released in 2019. He's from a fairly privileged background. He was a child of a photographer and former Black Panther father and college professor mother, growing up in Chicago and attending Chicago State University for 1 year before he dropped out to pursue his career in music. So he didn't need the college degree to do what he's good at. Arguably, he's made a massive career of it. Just a couple of years ago, it was estimated he was worth about $2 billion at the time. So clearly very, very successful. He demonstrated his abilities as a producer, contributing to other people's albums as well. James Dupree's album Life in 1472, which was a 1998 release, eventually relocating to New York City, where he then made his name with production work for Rockefeller Records, and especially was involved with Jay-Z, Beyonce's husband, as well, in his album Blueprint, which was 2001. And then thereafter, he began to enter the field of solo releases. He has a skillful use of accelerated sample-based beats, soon making him much in demand as producer, but because he struggled to be allowed to make his own recordings, partly because of perception that his middle-class background denied him credibility as a rapper in some way. Well, he didn't have the same story. If you think of Biggie, if you think of some of the golden generation of rappers, and even guys who remain on the scene like 50 Cent or the white rapper Eminem, these guys all have stories. They all have backgrounds. They all have busted caps in people, to use expressions that crop up in the lyrics. But they had a very, very different experience of the streets. So Kanye has kind of had to prove his street cred in a different type way. And he's had to cater in many ways to a very different audience. making his version, his brand, much more unique.
Absolutely.
Of others.
And to our viewers who are still trying to puzzle and work out who Kanye West is, he was married to Kim Kardashian. So that should give you an understanding of who he is now. But it's also interesting as well because he's gone on from quite a transformation. You know, like you said, socially he comes from a kind of very middle class background. You know, attended university. Is clearly a very gifted and talented musician and producer. Very creative individual. But we see that he is not afraid of making headlines, and back in 2005 he made the news when he was widely quoted that the federal government's slow response to the Hurricane Katrina disaster in New Orleans in 2005 demonstrated that the then US President George W. Bush doesn't care about black people, and a comment that Bush later characterized as one of his worst moments of his presidency. And we also see then that he became famous as well for marrying the socialite Kim Kardashian, which increased his kind of fortune or his worth to about 6.6 billion US dollars, which is extraordinary. And then in October of 2019, released the album that you listened to, Jesus is King, the gospel album that reflected his recommitment to Christianity, where he actually won Grammy for the best contemporary Christian music album. And of course, very much involved in working with the sports brand Adidas and fashion brands as well. But really kind of made a big name for himself, didn't he, back in 2020 when he announced himself that he was going to run for president.
Yeah, he announced he was going to be running as president as a member of the birthday party. So, I mean, this is very on brand for Kanye West to present something that is absolutely outrageous, knowing that he will manage to get a lot of attention for it. He even did some campaigning, not too much campaigning, but he did some campaigning. Just announcing he was running would have definitely garnered support from many of his fans or from neutrals who thought, well, they didn't have anyone better in their mind. They were thinking, didn't have anyone better they wanted to support. So he released a platform that notably called for reforming the police and legal system, reducing student debt, and having prayer in schools. The president at the time, Republican President Donald Trump, and his followers supported West's candidacy, believing that he could lure some voters away from the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, and what was expected to be an incredibly close election. Now, again, the credibility, I think this also downplays and undermines the intelligence of many Americans. Not too many people were actually going to seriously put their support behind the birthday party. And Kanye West, only 0.04, that's not 0.4, that's 0.04% of the national vote went to Kanye, nowhere near enough to affect any outcome, especially in the Electoral College. It just wasn't ever going to happen. In fact, arguably, it could have taken some votes away from the Republicans as much as it would have done from the Democrats. In 2021, his 10th studio album, Donda, was released. There were so many delays to the release of that, and then it was actually panned by quite a few people who were wondering what the big fuss was, what it was all about. Others did think it's just a very on-brand version of Ye's art. He masters in the controversial and frankly the bizarre, and tries to push the envelope at times. I mean, he has. You mentioned the fashion with Adidas. There's the famous Yeezy trainers, very popular, very, very popular with, I've known of some very young teenagers who, like, as soon as it's released, they're begging to have a pair of Yeezy trainers, and they're not inexpensive as well. So, he's made a name for himself in the fashion industry. He appeared even recently at Paris Fashion Week. This is back in October. He and his models wore shirts emblazoned with "White Lives Matter" as the slogan. He has a way of being a provocateur, and this has garnered him arguably a lot of attention over the years.
So let's just remind ourselves of the social media post he put out on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. This is what he says. He says to his, million plus followers on Twitter. I don't know how many followers he has on Twitter, but he says this one: "I'm a bit sleepy tonight, but when I wake up, I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people," he added. The funny thing is I can't actually be anti-Semitic because black people are actually Jews also. You guys have toured with me and tried to blackball me, anyone who ever opposes your agenda. And of course, his reference to DEFCON 3 is a reference to a military term in the United States for military preparedness. So, here he is threatening on his Twitter account the entire Jewish people, not a selected Jewish people, but brands the whole entire Jewish people. So this is kind of the big theme of the question. As we saw in 2019, his album about Jesus, reflecting Christianity with a gospel choir, seems that he was reconnecting to his kind of Christian background and his roots, and we thought, wow, here's a Christian artist who is willing to speak up on the social issues of the day, such as abortion and other issues, and taking a moral stand, and yet we see this anti-Semitic vitriol coming from his heart, which is deeply disturbing.
Well, it's only recently that Kanye has returned to Twitter. Elon Musk recently taking over, welcomed him back to Twitter with a welcome message. Welcome back to Twitter, my friend. Do you want to know how many followers he has? 31.7 million.
On Twitter?
31.7 million. That's on Twitter alone. So he tweeted that message, that vile anti-Semitic message, to 31.7 million. Okay, let's be ultra conservative and say that half of the people who follow Kanye just follow him to see what craziness he's going to say and what he's up to. They don't take him seriously. They're not influenced by him. Let's be very generous to those followers and say that only half. You're still talking about 15 million who at least 15 million who are going to follow what he says, look into it and think, oh yeah, this is good stuff. This is serious. And I would be very willing to wager that actually the number is far, far more. That's just Twitter alone. You think of Instagram and other platforms. Yes, he's been kicked off of Instagram and the Meta platforms. He complained about that too, Zuckerberg. But he has such a following of people who are not only going to look at what he says, many of them are going to feel his ability to say such provocative things somehow gives them license to repeat the same material in their own conversations, on their own threads, often which, because of lack of the same amount of followers, they will go unnoticed. They won't necessarily be banned because no one will report it in some cases. And so, it's difficult. This is where I think also, Simon, we have that tension of free speech. We value free speech, but when it calls for violence, and the terminology, just as an American, DEFCON 3, this is a violent, it's calling for violence. Whether he meant it or not isn't the question. He could say, oh, anyone who thinks that should be taken literally is crazy. Then you shouldn't say it, because there will be some people who do take it seriously.
And of course, what this is sowing is sowing discord, it's sowing hatred in American culture, but also beyond American culture, to culture around the world, as a dangerous indicator that Jew hatred has actually gone mainstream, has penetrated mainstream society with devastating impact for the West and for our culture, for our society, because we know what first starts with the Jews never finishes with the Jews. And this is why we have to call it out, and thankfully so many people have called it out, but the influence he has is pretty much unprecedented. So we kind of want to unpack really where his Christian theology and where this anti-Semitism fits into his so-called Christian beliefs. But before we do, let's have a look at this excellent CBN news report that talks about how Adidas now has severed their ties with Kanye West over his anti-Semitic remarks.
CBN News correspondent Brody Carter has our top story tonight. Brody?
Well, Caitlin, anti-Semitism in America hit an all-time high in 2021 with more than 2,700 documented cases of violence. The White House condemns such acts while bolstering its relations with Israel. Meanwhile, at least 7 organizations have distanced themselves from Kanye West. I spoke to a rabbi today who says it's simply amazing how one person like Kanye can spread so much hate and bigotry by simply texting.
I could say anti-Semitic things and Adidas can't drop me. Now what?
Adidas answered that question Tuesday by terminating its multi-million-dollar partnership with the rapper known as Ye and his Yeezy brand, following outrage over tweets like this. Kanye saying, quote, "When I wake up, I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people."
Genocide and population control that Black people are in today in America that is promoted by the music and the media that Black people make, that Jewish record labels get paid off of.
The sportswear company responding in part, Adidas does not tolerate anti-Semitism and any other sort of hate speech. Ye's recent comments have been unacceptable, hateful, and dangerous. Several other sponsors also dropped him, including French fashion house Balenciaga, Vogue magazine, and talent agency CAA.
He's now dominating the news cycle for about 10 days in the middle of the pre-election time. And all we're really seeing from it until now, the pushback, is toxic waste of Jew hatred and bigotry.
Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center says fallout from the superstar's tirade could be seen on a busy LA highway, with neo-Nazis holding banners reading, "Kanye is right about the Jews," and "honk if you know." Leaflets blaming the Jewish community for COVID were also scattered around the city, including Beverly Hills. The incident is now under investigation by the LAPD.
To the social media companies I've been dealing with for 3 decades, they should just get the hell out of politics and work together to degrade the marketing capability of nefarious bigots and racists like Kanye West.
The Kanye fallout comes amid Israeli President Isaac Herzog's visit to the White House, meeting with State Secretary Antony Blinken.
And your visit is quite simply a powerful symbol of the enduring partnership between Israel and the United States.
Thanks to CBN for that helpful background video that's there. Now, you're right, Simon, that a lot of this escalated following a conversation, a private conversation that another artist, Sean P. Diddy, comes what was basically approaching Kanye, saying, look, I want to challenge you on this message and your intent behind it. Private message, generally it's respectful to keep a private message private, right? "I'm trying to talk to you as a Black man," Diddy said, "and I'm talking to you because this is hurting our people. Stop." West replied, "Anything you text, I will post." And he kept his word, posting that entire exchange to his 18 million followers that's on Instagram. Meta, Facebook, Instagram, they have other holdings as well, but then proceeded to ban him from his account. That's when he went on Twitter and began to write these other anti-Semitic comments, and we've already seen it there. Even he almost acknowledges, it's like he acknowledges that he made an anti-Semitic comment there. He says, I say anti-Semitic things, and basically was saying Adidas isn't going to drop me. The man, over the course of his career, I remember saying something to this effect, it has to be 12, 13 years ago. He had said some things that were pretty blasphemous and controversial, but he views himself and has consistently viewed himself and presented himself as the greatest thing to ever happen in this world. Some of it's showmanship, some of it I think genuinely is what he believes. He is a narcissist. He very much likes to big himself up and present himself with this massive ego. That's part of his brand. So he's saying, I can say whatever I like. Adidas isn't going to drop me. Do you know how much I make for Adidas? Well, Adidas was making a lot for him, and let's just say he won't be getting that lot any longer.
$1 billion a year contract.
Yeah.
Gone overnight, which is frightening. But I suppose the other aspect to this one is his kind of anti-Semitic views that are kind of very disturbing. I mean, in one of the series of texts, he ended West accusing Coombs of being controlled by the Jewish people, an anti-Semitic Jewish conspiracy theory. He says, "This ain't a game. I'm going to use you as an influence to show the Jewish people that told you to call me that no one can threaten or influence me," he said to a friend, he wrote to a friend. It's reportedly captioned that the post of the text exchange, "Jesus is a Jew." The American Jewish community has since condemned West, saying that this post was dangerous. We've also seen that the rapper Kanye West appeared to threaten the Jewish people in a tweet, which I read out, saying he's going to go on DEFCON 3, and his friend also responded to that one, say that this was a funny thing actually did, because being anti-Semitic, I can't be anti-Semitic because black people are actually Jews also. He goes on to say, you guys have toyed with me and tried to blackball me anymore, and anyone who opposes your agenda. So of course, you know, this is all tied up with his ZZ fashion parade at the Paris Fashion Convention, where he wore those very controversial T-shirts saying white lives matter, and of course that was seen as support for white supremacists, which has angered the African American community in response to this. But look what he says regarding Jared Kushner, for example. West claimed that the former White House senior advisor, Jared Kushner, brokered the Abraham peace agreements between Israel and several Arab nations, did it in order to make money. And during an interview with Fox News' Tucker Carlson, West claimed that Kushner and his brother Josh, who are both Jewish, were acting like a handler to the former US President Donald Trump, and claimed that they love to look at me or look at Trump like we're so crazy, and they're the businessmen. He says, after talking to them and already sitting with Jared and sitting with Josh, I was like, wow, these guys have really been holding the former US President Trump back and being very much a handler, West told Fox News, reflected on his relationship with the Kushners. So the fact he calls them the handler, and I've seen that interview he did with Tucker Carlson on Fox News. He looks like a man who's in seriously trouble and he needs serious help. Of course, in 2021, we saw the breakup of his marriage to Kim Kardashian as well. So that would have had a knock-on impact. He was talking about how he didn't like how the fashion brands and the media wanted his wife to kind of pose in a provocative way for photographs and for magazine shoots and stuff as well. He was extremely unhappy with that. He then in that interview spoke up on the issue of abortion and saying how he's been targeted and he's not favoured because he doesn't follow the liberal left's progressive agenda, so he's come under fire from that. But he also subtly talks about the handlers being those behind the white man. So I guess what we have to unpack really is he is a confessed Christian. He talks about God. He even talked about God and his relationship with God with Tucker Carlson, reflecting on the fact that African American babies are being aborted and nothing's been done to help them, and this is all a big lie. But he's really referring to also his theology, that he thinks he's a Jew, that he thinks he is part of the chosen race, that he can't be anti-Semitic because he's Jewish. Do you want to unpack some of these very disturbing statements that he's made, Reagan?
Yeah, so there is a line of thought that's out there, Simon, that's very influential, that seems to have crept into Kanye's beliefs. When he, in 2019, really seemed to have a moment of rededication and was speaking of himself rededicating his life to Christ. There was some dis-ease about how he was being platformed so quickly and readily by all manner of churches to share without discernment and without discipleship. But it seems that he has come under some influence of the theology of the Black Hebrew Israelites, as definitely that's what's coming out of his mouth anyway. Black Hebrew Israelite ideology is rooted in fringe interpretations of enslavement and mistreatment of black individuals throughout history, including the belief that God punished disobedient Israelites by spreading their nation and their descendants across the world, primarily via the slave trade. Now, there's nowhere in the scriptures that we see that sort of spreading, and there's nowhere in the scriptures that we see that suddenly there's a complete change of ethnic identity and background. Of course, the Jews were spread in the diaspora, and you do have some who are converts of various communities that have converted to Judaism in Africa. But to say that the blood goes all the way back is very far-fetched. And to then, not only that's fine, it's one thing to say we're related or we have relatives, we go back to the original 12 tribes. That's one thing, but that's not what Black Hebrew Israelites do. They deny the authenticity of the present-day Jews in the Middle East and in Israel and around the world. Kanye would look at most of the Jews in the United States who are of Middle Eastern or European, Caucasian-y complexion, although to be Jewish it's a completely different ethnicity than that of those who are Caucasian. He would look and say they're not real Jews. And this is all part of this theology, this belief system that says those who are from Africa are actually true Jews. Black Hebrew Israelite ideology presents itself as a black supremacist movement. I was telling you earlier, Simon, how I encountered a group of Black Hebrew Israelites on an underground train, and the conversation that they were speaking about was misogynistic, extremely crass and crude, and demeaning to women, hateful toward Jews, hateful toward whites, just across the board. In Wood Green and Tottenham, where I've lived in London, very large ethnic minority populations, you will have these guys set up tent, like sort of a canopy or a table or something, where they'll be giving books, they'll be giving literature, or they will be shouting through microphones about their ideology, and going unchallenged in many cases.
And Reagan, I mean, I first became aware of the kind of Black Hebrew Israelites back in 2019 when Israel was having a problem with African migrants coming through. And I was seeing on some of the kind of postings on YouTube of the Middle East Report, some of these outrageous anti-Semitic comments that the Africans are the real Jews, and Israel's treatment of these Africans was shocking. I got a number of emails myself, so of course I've done a couple of programs regarding this issue. But one thing is very, very disturbing, and this is almost central to the theology of the Black Hebrew Israelites, is the fact that they believe that the white man was responsible for the slave trade. But as they see it, they see, well, who is the power behind the white man? It's the Jews. So therefore the Jews must have been responsible for the slave trade, and therefore it's their fault. So therefore, this is why we have so much hatred against the Jewish people, because they were essentially responsible for the slave trade, which ignores the fact that the Jewish people were slaves under Pharaoh for about 40 years until God raised up Moses to set them free. So they have been slaved themselves. They have been under slavery. And let's make no mistake that slavery was barbaric. It was horrific. We see the damage it's done centuries after that was introduced. But we're really seeing that scripture has been reinterpreted to fit that narrative that everything is about oppression. Everything is about the slave trade and how we need to confront it. And I'm also seeing that with any political or religious ideology where Jew hatred is at the center core of an ideology, we know that this is really dangerous. This is beyond dangerous, because this can lead into kind of authoritarian, extreme political and religious ideologies. And this is why we're addressing this much, because I've seen quite a few news reports. I've read a lot talking about Kanye West's outrageous, vile, anti-Semitic social media postings. But one thing we need to address is that theology that is underpinning his ideas of what he's speaking about, because it's not just him. He, as you were saying, he has had a following on Twitter before it's suspended of over 33 million people. He had 18.5 million people across the road following him on Instagram. And what you say as an influencer has huge influence through his music, through his fashion, through his views. And saying, well, if Kanye West or Ye thinks it's popular to be anti-Semitic, then I want to be too. And of course, what then you're opening up yourself and your culture and your nation is a wave of Jew hatred that once it open is unstoppable. And let's also realize as well that America, the United States, has had problems of anti-Semitism, but largely this is pretty much a new thing. It's only been in the last decade where we've seen anti-Semitism really hit the continent of the United States. Before, the United States used to be a safe haven for the Jewish people. It was the only nation where the Jewish people fled from the persecution of the pogroms of Europe to find safety in the United States, where they found that acceptance. And I think it's fair to say that America is the only nation in the world that you see a demonstration of that blend of Judeo-Christian heritage run right through American culture. It was President George Washington himself that actually gave the Jewish community positions of leadership in his first administration after defeating the British in America's War of Independence, because they helped to bankroll his campaign against the British. And ever since then, the Jewish community has been given an honored place within American society. And I believe that's why God has blessed America so much to be the power and the influence it has, because it's been the only nation in the world that's fully embraced and accepted the Jewish people. So let's have a look at this other CBN news report that is looking at how we're seeing a rise in Jew hatred, particularly stemming from African American community.
On July 1st, these New York City demonstrators verbally attacked the police.
The police that are around us are not our friends, they are our enemy.
Then they turned to the Jews.
The European Jews who occupy, slaughter, and continue to force millions of Palestinians onto their killing fields called refugee and concentration camps.
And the slurs spread beyond the Big Apple to the nation's capital.
Israel, we know you murder children too.
Rabbi Abraham Cooper sees an explosion of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel lies.
Fundamentally, the most troubling is the lie that Israel somehow was involved in training the bad apples of the police in the United States.
An accusation made by Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan toward Israel in a speech on July 4th.
You mayors, you governors, stop your police from going to Israel to learn how to kill better.
And so 500,000 people heard us scream where Jews were called the devil and we're linked to coronavirus, and off we go to the races. It reminds me of a statement made, I think around 100 years ago, by Winston Churchill, who said that, a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on.
Cooper says another current accusation is Jewish white privilege. Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver Deshaun Jackson apologized for posting an anti-Semitic message on Instagram, saying white Jews will blackmail America, they will extort America, and incorrectly attributing the quote to Hitler.
To me, it's especially outrageous because apparently for 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, they weren't white enough to avoid being mass murdered by the Nazis, who were the ultimate supremacists. And then seeing how social media and a very politicized journalism situation means that some of the most vile, disgusting, and baseless ideas are elevated to, discussion.
Rabbi Cooper wrote recently about the importance of the Jewish community and African American leaders working together for the common good.
I think that everyone identifies with the concept of Black Lives Matter. African Americans are still battling racism, but as we see, some of the forces unleashed also have led to looting, violence, the attempt to tear down American history.
Cooper says that relationship can help counter speeches like Farrakhan's that become fueled by social media and injected into the culture and society. Cooper maintains coalitions must come together in this national discussion in order to fight both racism and anti-Semitism.
What's really important for our center, for the American Jewish community and beyond, is we can't defeat anti-Semitism without friends and allies. Find common cause where we can, and I believe there's a lot of common ground that we can in fighting anti-Semitism and racism going forward. I think what Farrakhan and the others want to do is they want to isolate and they want to bully the Jewish community. We're not going to let them do that.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Some very helpful background there. Let me just give a very brief overview as well of this other, because it's quite a complicated situation here. Obviously, Kanye West is being influenced by the Black Hebrew Israelites, which we're going to talk more about their beliefs, but there's some undeniable hints of influence from Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. And at first sight, you're going to think, Nation of Islam, oh, it's a branch of Islam. I mean, that's what it sounds like. That's what it presents itself as. But actually, it's completely disowned by Muslims. It's about as Christian as Mormonism is Christian. I'll just briefly explain what they are. They were founded in about 1930. Malcolm X was a famous leader of the Nation of Islam. This is some of their belief. They teach that there has been a succession of mortal gods, each a black man named Allah, of which Fard Muhammad, the first, is the most recent. It claims that the first Allah created the earliest humans, the Arabic-speaking dark-skinned tribe of Shabazz, whose members possessed inner divinity and from whom all people of color are descended. A scientist named Yaqub then created the white race. The whites lacked inner divinity and were intrinsically violent, overthrowing the tribe of Shabazz and achieving global dominance. It then sets itself against the white-dominated society, primarily of the United States. It is extremely American-centered. That's why I'm seeing hints here, Simon, of not only Mormonism, but Scientology, also very USA-centered. The Nation of Islam campaigns for the creation of an independent African-American nation-state and calls for African-Americans to be economically self-sufficient and even separatist, and this is an extreme group that's out there that can only be described as the polar opposite of white supremacy. This is black supremacy, but Black Hebrew Israelites often drawing on some similar type ideas. Just a little bit of background. F.S. Cherry was the founder of what was technically called the Church of the Living God, the pillar ground of truth of all nations. Originally, it was founded in the 1880s. The organization then grew in size and influence, moving from Tennessee to Pennsylvania in the early 1900s. Cherry integrated racism into his teachings, preaching that all biblical prophets and individuals were black and that God hates white individuals because they are frauds. Now, Simon, you can understand the pain, you can understand the hurt. One could even potentially, without Christ, understand the bitterness as a result of slavery and fraudulent treatment and the evil of that. You can get that, right? I understand that. But Martin Luther King Jr. used to say something to the effect that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. In the same way, it's very clear that this is just taken the worst of, we'll use the terminology, white society, and it's made a replica of that. promoting just a flip side coin version that is equally racist and equally abhorrent. Now, at the same time as that organization, the Church of God and Saints of Christ served as a non-racist alternative to Cherry's teaching. They were founded in Lawrence, Kansas. This British Hebrew Israelite sect mixed aspects of Christianity with Israelite slave narratives. Crowdy, an escaped slave, said he received godly visions that proved the lost tribes of Israel were black. Not every vision you have, not every dream you have is meant to be taken of God. Please, folks, remember that. Jude says when people rely on their dreams, they defy authority, they defile the flesh, and they blaspheme the glorious ones. Consider and weigh it up with God's word. The 20th century saw the growth of anti-Semitic and extremist teachings that combined with other extremist teachings, including those of the Nation of Islam, which we were just talking about, and Moorish sovereign citizens. And it's just kind of created this toxic soup.
Absolutely. I mean, if you read this one, it says here that black Hebrew Israelites did not align themselves with Judaism. Instead, as Jacob Dorman explains, they creatively manipulated traditions and ideas gleaned from a wide range of sources. Holiness, Pentecostal Christianity, I mentioned the British Anglo-Israelite movement, Freemasonry, mind power, theosophy, Judaism, the occult, and African American Christianity's deep association with the Hebrews of the Old Testament. The African American BH groups also have no significant history with the Ethiopian Jews, aka Bet Israel, or the Falashas, even though Dorman notes that the New York's main body of black Israelites called themselves Ethiopian Jews from the 1930s to the 1960s. And of course, their teaching also, they teach from the book of Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Torah, and the King James Bible to tell the history of the Israelites from the Old Testament and give a biblical explanation to the transatlantic slave trade. Teachings assert the Israelites were warned of the repercussions of breaking the commandments but did not abide, resulting in enslavement and punishment, and another race inhabiting Israel in their place. Preachers use Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 to 68, to encourage individuals to embrace their true title as God's chosen children, or continue to suffer in society as the ancestors have done. So, I mean, this is very much a reflection of what Paul warns about false teachers. In the church and false cults, and how they are not interested in the followers' own spiritual relationship with God and encouraging that and glorifying Jesus. They want adherents and followers for themselves. They even question the divinity of Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us, as the Messiah, and refer to him as only a prophet. Now, we know from the Old Testament, particularly Paul's warnings in the letters to the churches, that anyone who denies that Jesus is God in the flesh, theology is essentially a satanic theology.
Yeah, it is. Teachings of demons definitely incorporates that. Now, one of the issues, Simon, is there seems to be a lot of hatred and a lot of bitterness and a lot of anger over the very white-oriented Christendom of the medieval ages, and so things like the images and paintings, you'll hear people say, oh, Jesus wasn't a white man. Well, okay, the paintings of the Renaissance were used actual models, right? They actually used real life people, and remember that there wasn't the ease of travel and there wasn't the familiarity with the land and stuff, and so you generally had a conveying of culture through art. So you had Jesus and everyone around him generally depicting those who were around them in very much the same way that you can go to Coptic churches and see images of Jesus and the disciples very much having very different features from those of Europe. So you see art has its own ideas. Even in Asia, you have some cases where Jesus is depicted with very Asian figures. Okay, it really doesn't matter in one way, but I would say this, if anyone is tempted by this, of course we know that Jesus was not a white man. I'm not a massive fan of images of Jesus anyway, but
he's certainly not the blonde hair. He's certainly not the blonde hair, blue-eyed. He was Jewish, would have been Mediterranean as well. But
and Revelation speaks of him being bronze and this complexion, which makes sense. But that doesn't equate to him being African any more than it equates to him being European. The interesting thing, Simon, and maybe you can kind of feed into this and make some sense of it, is there's this claim we are descended from the 12 tribes of Israel. It must be us, and it mustn't be them. That's the issue. Okay, so the historic line of Jews that goes all the way back, and I remind viewers that the genealogies of the Jews to this day are very precise. They're second to none in terms of record keeping. And my wife's family, for instance, traces its roots back to the tribe of Levi. You only know that through genealogies.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the genealogy is historic. There's no genealogy here. There's no history here. It's just not present. But we'll look at them, and because these guys, they were dispersed into Europe, and so they have slightly paler complexion than your average Middle Eastern person now, we'll look at them and say they're frauds, they're not real Jews, we're the real Jews.
Absolutely. So let's unpack some of the anti-Semitism and this extreme elements of the black Hebrew Israelite. So some of their anti-Semitic beliefs are expressed. They include the claims that the Jews have no right to Israel as a homeland, contentions that Israel will not be fruitful until they return to the Israelites, association that Jews purposely enslaved black individuals to steal their identity, and assertions that the Jews are imposters or satanic. Judaism is frequently referred to as the synagogue of Satan. Stolen identity is a central piece of ideology and the basis of animosity towards Jews. Among the commonly cited passages to justify this hatred is Revelation 3 verse 9 that says, "Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and they are not, but to lie. Behold, I will make them come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee." Examples of anti-Semitism are recorded in one sermon in the 21st of January 2020, where Bishop Nathaniel and other leadership refer to Jews as the devil that the Bible even speaks of, the so-called Jews, the house of demons, and specifically call for Hasidic Jews as evil despots. And during the same sermon, another leader disparages the Jews by stating they lie in their media, they lie in their synagogues, they lie all over the place. Everything they do is about lying. And then in October 2020, the main Facebook account for one of these fellowships says that black people have been experiencing a Holocaust since the 1400s, and the Jewish man has perpetuated this situation. So in closing, really, Reagan, we can see that Kanye West, or Ye, has caught up, sadly, with this really dark and demonic theology that believes that the African Americans have replaced Israel and the Jewish people in the call of God, that they are the true Israelites. Therefore, he can spout as much anti-Semitic viral as he wants. He then knows that he feels that he won't be attacked from it because he's already Jewish anyway. And this is what we've got to unpack. So, Reagan, as a pastor, can you just share with any of our viewers who are influenced by the Black Hebrew Israelite movement how dangerous this is in terms of theology and apostasy, and how as Christians we are commanded to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We are commanded to love Israel and the Jewish people, and they are the chosen people of God. And this is what we're exposing, this hatred that underlines this theology that is taken root and having an influence over the likes of Kanye West, having an influence over Wiley, who went on a 48 Twitter raid full of anti-Semitic vile posts referring to the fact that the Jews are the real, that the Africans are the real Jews, they are the real Israel, and they're being exploited. So we're seeing that this theology is having a big impact on the black music industry.
Yeah, I mean, his views are not unique by any means. I have seen since he posted Others, I would say, generally speaking, conservative, right-wing African-American voices taking his side, expressing themselves in similar ways. This is dangerous theology. Why? Okay, first of all, truth is objective. Okay, it's concrete. You can't muck about with truth. You have to take a side. You have to draw the line and say what is real. Okay, it's not about feeling or anything like that. It's about what's reality. And I'm here because of objective truth. It is inarguable that the Jews who are called Jews today are the only Jews, okay? And as much as many people want to be the special covenant people of God, the way to being a part of the special covenant people of God is now through Jesus Christ and being grafted into Israel through Jesus Christ, okay? It's not about branding yourself a real Jew at the expense of those who are actually real Jews in their ethnicity and in their ongoing belief system. So that's not the answer. The scriptures call us to be faithful, to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and there's been a consistent presence of the Jews, regardless of what some people out there say. There's been a consistent presence of the Jews, Simon, in the land of Israel since God brought Abraham there. Yes, there were dispersions, but there was never a complete eradication.
Absolutely. But I think we also have to look at the influence and the impact that this is having on the American Jewish community as well, who have felt relatively peaceful in the United States, apart from pockets of history within American history. But now they really feel that anti-Semitism has gone mainstream. Mm-hmm. They're fearing now that neo-fascist groups and others will take on board Kanye West's social media postings and comments and actually carry out anti-Semitic attacks on the Jewish community. And we've also got to realize that how a nation and society treat the Jewish people will determine how God will bless that society and that nation. And we also know, for example, that if we allow anti-Semitism to rise its vile, ugly head, then we know that destruction of our own civilization and society is just around the corner. And this is why it's imperative that we stand with Israel, we stand with the Jewish people, that we confront anti-Semitism, because it's a disease that will infect every aspect of our society, our culture, and essentially will attack our freedoms as well, because it's demonic. And every demonic political or religious ideology that has Jew hatred at its center core of ideology will lead to tyranny. This is why it's so dangerous, and this is why the world needs to wake up before it's too late, but also to reassure Israel and the Jewish people they're not alone in this time of rising Jew hatred. And this is why I think we need to pray for Kanye West. I think he's a confused individual. We prayed God to have the right influence of Bible-believing Christians around him to help him restore some of his life before he does even more damage.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing those things, Simon. It's been a great program to discuss this very crucial issue of anti-Semitism. Kanye West needs our prayers. He is, I believe, a mentally disturbed, but also spiritually disturbed and dysfunctional individual, and yet he has been given a platform that gives him extreme influence. So viewers, please keep him in prayer and continue to pray for the peace of the Jews in the United States and of course elsewhere. He has very far reach. We pray that God would protect and that he would overrule.
So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. I think we mentioned that if we have the wrong theology, we need to check it with what the Bible says and take the Bible literally. And if there's any anti-Semitism in our heart, then we need to pray to God that he would actually remove it, because we need to be a blessing to Israel and the Jewish people, because they are the people of God. They are the covenant chosen people. So I want to thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.